18-year-old Cameron Herron stood before Hillsborough County Circuit Judge Christopher Reardon in the stifling atmosphere of the Tampa, Florida courtroom on April 8, 2021. Clad in a baggy orange prison jumpsuit that seemed to swallow his frame, his dark eyes were red-rimmed and overflowing with tears, his chest heaving with audible sobs. He looked small, terrified, and utterly defeated as Judge Reardon prepared to sentence him for the vehicular homicide of 24-year-old Jessica Reisinger Raubenold and her 1-year-old daughter, Lilia. Cameron had been piloting his Ford Mustang at speeds exceeding 102 miles per hour down Bayshore Boulevard, treating the public road like a video game speedway when he plowed into the young mother pushing her daughter in a stroller, killing both victims instantly and scattering debris across the scenic waterfront promenade. Before we continue with this disturbing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But to understand the sheer volatility of this sentencing hearing, we must look past the trembling teenager at the defense table. For the 3 years between the fatal crash and this final day of reckoning, the community had been torn apart by the senselessness of the crime. While the Reisinger and Raubenold families navigated an agonizing grief, a disturbing counter-narrative had begun to form online, where thousands of social media users fetishized the defendant, pleading for his release based solely on his appearance. Inside the courtroom, however, the reality was far colder. As Cameron wept, pleading for a second chance, Judge Reardon remained stone-faced, his demeanor unyielding. He did not look at the crying boy. He looked at the evidence. Slowly, with a kind of grim theatricality that silenced the gallery, the judge reached for a folder on his bench. He picked up a stack of printed screenshots, evidence that had not been part of the viral TikTok trends defending the killer. These were Cameron's own digital footprints, posts that peeled away the mask of the remorseful child to reveal the arrogance of a thrill-seeker who had flirted with death long before he took 2 innocent lives. 17-year-old Elias James Thorne stood before Westchester County Supreme Court Judge Patricia Calloway in White Plains, New York, on October 12, 2023, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that seemed designed to emphasize his youth. His dark hair was swept to the side, and his face was wet with tears, his shoulders shaking visibly as his defense attorney, Martin Garris, pleaded for leniency. Garris described Elias as a brilliant young man who made a terrible, singular mistake, painting a portrait of a star athlete and honor student crumbling under the weight of an accidental tragedy. Elias wept openly, his head in his hands, presenting the image of a broken child terrified of the adult world. But Judge Calloway was not looking at the crying boy. She was looking at a stack of printed screenshots resting on her bench, evidence that had been admitted but not fully contextualized until this sentencing phase. The boy looked like a child, but the evidence suggested a predator wearing a child's skin. As Elias let out a particularly loud sob, Judge Calloway's eyes narrowed. She picked up a sheet of paper, the silence in the courtroom becoming suffocating. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through his theatrics like a razor, "you may stop crying. We have read your group chat logs from the night of the murder. We know exactly what you think of these tears. But to understand how we arrived at this chilling moment of exposure, we must go back to the environment that created Elias Thorne. Born into the affluent suburb of Scarsdale, Elias was the definition of a golden child. His father was a senior partner at a Manhattan law firm, and his mother was a renowned pediatric surgeon. From the outside, the Thorne residence, a sprawling colonial on a 2-acre lot manicured to perfection, was a bastion of success. Elias was the captain of the varsity lacrosse team and maintained a 4.2 GPA. Neighbors described him as polite, charming, and driven. However, behind the closed door of his second-story bedroom, illuminated by the blue light of 3 computer monitors, a different Elias existed. Investigators later recovered a digital footprint that revealed a disturbing obsession with nihilism and violence. While his parents believed he was studying for AP Calculus, Elias was moderating a private Discord server under the handle God Mode 0. In this digital echo chamber, Elias didn't discuss lacrosse or college applications. Instead, he engaged in what prosecutors would later call rehearsals for cruelty. He shared detailed fantasies of strangulation, researched the decomposition rates of human bodies in woodland environments, and mocked the very concept of empathy. On his hard drive, police found a folder titled simply Art, which contained not drawings, but hundreds of saved images of car crash victims and crime scene photos, meticulously categorized by injury type. This digital toxicity eventually bled into the real world, focusing its dark energy on 16-year-old Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was everything Elias pretended to be, genuinely kind, artistic, and beloved by her peers. She was a sophomore with a passion for watercolor painting and dreams of attending RISD. She had briefly dated Elias in the fall of 2022, ending the relationship after 3 weeks because, as she told her best friend in a text message, "It feels like he's watching me, not seeing me, like I'm an object on a shelf." That rejection, seemingly minor to the outside world, shattered Elias's narcissistic facade. On the afternoon of November 14, 2022, around 3:45 p.m., Elias convinced Sarah to meet him at the Saxon Woods Park Trail entrance under the guise of returning a sketchbook she had left in his car. What happened next was not a crime of passion, as the defense initially claimed, but a choreographed execution. According to forensic evidence and location data from both phones, the two walked nearly a mile into the woods. At 4:12 p.m., Elias struck. He did not use a weapon of opportunity. He used a jagged 6-inch tactical knife he had purchased online 3 months prior, using a prepaid Visa card to avoid his parents' credit card statements. He attacked Sarah from behind. The medical examiner's report detailed 19 distinct stab wounds, but it was the digital evidence that truly horrified the community. At 4:28 p.m., 16 minutes after Sarah's heart had stopped beating, Elias took a photo. He positioned her lifeless hand to look like she was reaching out, framed artistically against the autumn leaves, and saved it to his private folder. Before leaving the woods, he logged into Twitter. He didn't call 911. He didn't panic. He tweeted a cryptic lyrics from a song, "Silence is the only truth." Before we continue with the revelation of the social media evidence that sealed his fate, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us expose these cases. For the next 3 weeks, Elias Thorne played the role of the grieving ex-boyfriend to perfection. He attended the candlelight vigils held in the high school gymnasium, wearing the same suit he would later wear to his sentencing. He hugged Sarah's mother, weeping on her shoulder, whispering that he wished he could have protected her. He even helped organize a GoFundMe for her funeral expenses. But the police were watching, and more importantly, they were reading. When a warrant finally granted detectives access to his encrypted heavy-use accounts, the facade disintegrated. They found a draft, tweet, written 2 days after the murder but never sent, which read, "Everyone looks so ugly when they cry. I look great. They found searches for how to beat a polygraph and minimum sentencing for minors in NY." Back in the courtroom, Judge Calloway held up the specific piece of evidence that stopped Elias's tears cold. It was a printout of a Snapchat message sent to his online friend group just hours after the murder, while police were knocking on doors in his neighborhood. "You sit here today," Judge Calloway said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage, "and you cry for mercy. You cry for your future. But let the record show what you wrote at 9:30 p.m. on the night you took Sarah's life." She adjusted her glasses and read the transcript aloud into the microphone. The text reads, "I should have taken a trophy. Next time I will. Also, practicing my sad face in the mirror right now. Do you think a single tear on the left cheek is too cliché? LOL." The courtroom erupted. Sarah's father lunged toward the defense table and had to be restrained by 3 bailiffs. Elias Thorne, the boy who thought he could outsmart the world, stopped crying instantly. The sorrow vanished from his face, replaced by a look of cold, bored indifference. He slumped back in his chair, checking his fingernails, as if the proceedings were merely wasting his time. The mask had fallen, and underneath, there was nothing human left to save. Judge Calloway sentenced Elias to the maximum penalty allowed by law, 25 years to life. As he was led away in shackles, he did not look at his weeping parents. He looked directly at the court camera and winked. This case forces us to ask a terrifying question. In an age where online personas can completely mask offline depravity, how well do we truly know the people living in our own homes? 19-year-old Caleb James Whitman stood before Oakland County Circuit Judge Martha Anderson in the courtroom in Pontiac, Michigan, on October 14, 2022, wearing a slightly oversized charcoal suit that swallowed his slender frame, his face wet with tears and his hands trembling visibly as Judge Anderson prepared to sentence him for 2 counts of second-degree murder. To the casual observer, Caleb looked like a terrified child, a young man broken by a tragic mistake, hyperventilating as he whispered apologies toward the gallery where the weeping families of his victims sat. But Judge Anderson was not looking at a child. She was looking at a defendant who, just weeks prior to the crash, had bragged online about his ability to evade consequences. The disconnect between the sobbing boy at the defense table and the digital predator revealed in evidence was absolute. But to understand how we got here, to comprehend how a suburban teenager ends up facing life in prison for a night of vehicular carnage, we must go back to the environment that fostered this lethal entitlement. Caleb was raised in the affluent enclave of Bloomfield Hills, the only son of a successful real estate developer. By all accounts, the Whitman home was one of permissiveness. Friends later testified that there were no curfews and no consequences. When Caleb turned 16, his first car was not a starter sedan, but a Dodge Charger SRT Hellcat, a vehicle with over 700 horsepower, designed for the track but unleashed on the residential streets of Oakland County. His digital footprint paints a disturbing portrait of his psychology. Investigators recovered hundreds of Snapchat videos filmed from the driver's seat, the speedometer frequently blurring past 140 miles per hour, captioned with phrases like "untouchable" and "cops can't catch what they can't see." This was not a moment of madness. It was a lifestyle of calculated recklessness. On the fateful night of November 12, 2021, the timeline of destruction began early. At 8:45 p.m., Caleb picked up 2 friends. Security footage from a local gas station at 9:12 p.m. shows Caleb laughing as he filled the tank, mimicking the action of a checkered flag wave. By 11:30 p.m., the group had moved to Telegraph Road, a wide thoroughfare known among locals as a hotspot for illicit racing. At 11:42 p.m., Caleb's vehicle was stopped at a red light alongside a modified Ford Mustang driven by a stranger. When the light turned green, the two cars didn't just accelerate, they launched. Witnesses described the sound as akin to a jet engine taking off. Data from the Charger's event data recorder, or black box, would later freeze the terrifying mathematics of the next 30 seconds. Within a quarter mile, Caleb reached 108 miles per hour. 5 seconds later, 124 miles per hour. Crossing the intersection of Telegraph and Maple was 23-year-old Sarah Jenkins and her fiancé, 24-year-old Michael Ross. They were returning home from a late movie, driving a Honda Civic. They were planning a wedding for the following June. Sarah was a pediatric nurse known for her gentle patience. Michael was finishing his master's degree in architecture. They had names, they had futures, and they had exactly 3 seconds left to live. At 11:43 p.m., as the Honda entered the intersection on a green light, Caleb Whitman's Charger, now traveling at 132 miles per hour in a 45 zone, slammed into the driver's side door. The physics were catastrophic. The force of the impact was so violent it severed the Honda in half, sending the front portion spinning 200 feet into a nearby embankment. Sarah and Michael were killed instantly, their bodies subjected to forces that the human frame simply cannot withstand. While bystanders rushed to the smoking wreckage of the Honda, finding a scene of horror that would require closed casket funerals for both victims, Caleb Whitman emerged from his vehicle with only minor scratches. But it was his behavior in the immediate aftermath that Judge Anderson focused on during the sentencing. Police body cam footage captured Caleb not asking about the occupants of the other car, but frantically texting on his phone. He wasn't calling 911. He was deleting his social media history. Back in the courtroom, the sobbing intensified as the prosecutor played the recovered videos. Files Caleb thought were gone forever. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as a video from 20 minutes prior to the crash played on the monitors. It showed Caleb weaving through traffic at 110 miles per hour, laughing maniacally, with the text overlay, "I own this road." Judge Anderson looked down at the weeping 19-year-old, her expression hardening into stone. She picked up a stack of printed screenshots, the deleted posts. "Mr. Whitman," Judge Anderson's voice cut through the sound of his crying, "you sit here today, asking for mercy, presenting yourself as a child who made a mistake. But looking at these posts, I don't see a child. I see a narcissist who viewed the public roads as his playground and human beings as obstacles." She held up a specific screenshot, a tweet from 3 months prior. "You wrote here, 'If I ever crash, I'll just cry to the judge. Works every time.' Do you remember writing that, Mr. Whitman?" The courtroom gasped. Caleb's sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a look of sheer terror. The strategy was laid bare. The tears were not for Sarah and Michael. They were a performance, predicting exactly this moment. "You thought the tears would work," Judge Anderson continued, leaning forward. "You thought you could game the system just like you gamed the speed limits. But the lives of Sarah Jenkins and Michael Ross are not a game. And this court is not your stage." Judge Anderson sentenced Caleb James Whitman to 40 to 60 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. As the bailiffs moved in to handcuff him, the child mask slipped completely, and Caleb stared blankly at the floor, the reality of dying in prison settling in. This sentence cannot bring Sarah and Michael back, the judge concluded, watching him being led away. But it ensures that the road is safe from you. Which leaves us with a difficult question. When a teenager treats a vehicle like a weapon and social media like a scoreboard, is a lengthy prison sentence enough to balance the scales for 2 stolen lives? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. 17-year-old Elias James Thorne stood before Oakland County Circuit Court Judge Patricia Harrison in Pontiac, Michigan, on September 12, 2023, wearing an ill-fitting charcoal grey suit that swallowed his slender frame, his shoulders shaking and his face wet with tears as Judge Harrison prepared to sentence him for the first-degree murder of 16-year-old Maya Elizabeth Lynn. To the casual observer in the gallery, Elias looked like a terrified child, a boy overwhelmed by a tragic mistake, hyperventilating as his defense attorney placed a comforting hand on his back. But the detectives sitting in the front row, there, arms crossed and jaws set tight, knew that the trembling boy before them was wearing a mask. They had seen what lay behind those tears, and they knew that the only thing Elias Thorne was sorry for was the fact that his digital footprint had survived the deletion attempts. Before we continue with this disturbing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But to understand how we got here, we must go back to the quiet, tree-lined streets of Rochester Hills. Elias had grown up in a home that neighbors described as immaculately kept, but emotionally frigid. While his parents provided him with the latest gaming consoles and a silver Honda Civic for his 16th birthday, investigators would later uncover a domestic atmosphere defined by neglect and unspoken resentment. Left largely to his own devices in a basement bedroom, illuminated only by the glow of 3 computer monitors, Elias cultivated a secret life far removed from his identity as a B-average student. His search history, recovered by forensic analysts despite his use of specialized wiping software, painted a chilling portrait of escalating obsession. Beginning in January 2022, the search term shifted from innocuous video game cheats to graphic anatomy diagrams. On February 14, 2022, Valentine's Day, Elias searched for how much pressure to break a trachea and sentencing guidelines for minors in Michigan. He wasn't looking for help. He was doing research. On the evening of June 4, 2022, at approximately 8:15 p.m., the theoretical became physical. Maya Lynn, a vibrant junior with a passion for watercolor painting and dreams of attending the Art Institute of Chicago, had agreed to meet Elias at the secluded Bloomer Park to return a hoodie he had left at her house. Maya was the kind of girl who stopped to move turtles off the road, a daughter whose laughter filled her parents' home with a warmth that was now permanently extinguished. She had broken up with Elias 2 weeks prior, citing his controlling behavior and his demand that she share her social media passwords with him. When Maya arrived at the park, the sun was just beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the empty picnic area where Elias waited. He didn't plead for her back. According to the reconstruction of the crime scene, Elias attacked her almost immediately. He struck her 14 times with a heavy-duty flashlight before dragging her unconscious body into the brush. But it was what happened next that would eventually shatter his courtroom facade. For the 3 months following Maya's disappearance, Elias played the part of the heartbroken ex-boyfriend to perfection. He helped organize search parties, printed missing person flyers, and even sat in the Lynn family's living room, holding Maya's mother's hand as she wept. However, the veil of denial was pierced on August 15, 2022, when a hiker's dog discovered Maya's remains. The subsequent seizure of Elias's phone revealed the true depth of his depravity. He hadn't just killed Maya, he had broadcasted it. Recovered Snapchat logs and private Discord messages showed that while the community was searching for Maya, Elias was bragging. At 9:43 p.m. on the night of the murder, less than 2 hours after he killed her, he sent a photo of his blood-spattered sneakers to a group chat labeled The Void. The caption read, "She actually begged. It was pathetic." In another exchange, when a friend asked if he was worried about getting caught, Elias replied, "Nah, I'll just cry. Judges love a sad white boy." Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted from pity to revulsion as Judge Harrison began to read these very transcripts aloud. The sobbing boy in the charcoal suit suddenly went still. The trembling stopped. Elias Thorne straightened his posture, his expression hardening into a look of bored indifference as the judge's voice rang out through the tense silence. "You thought you could manipulate this court with tears," Judge Harrison said, looking over the rim of her glasses, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You mocked the life you stole. You mocked the grief of these parents, and you mocked the justice system." The most shocking moment came when the prosecution played a recovered video file found in a hidden folder on Elias's cloud drive. It was a 10-second clip filmed by Elias immediately after the murder. In it, he turned the camera on himself, breathless and sweating, and whispered, "Game over." He then feigned a crying face before breaking into a wide, toothy grin and ending the recording. As the screen in the courtroom went black, Maya's father lunged toward the defense table, restrained only by 3 bailiffs who held him back as he screamed his daughter's name. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't look at the family. He simply picked a piece of lint off his suit jacket. Judge Harrison wasted no time. "Elias Thorne, for the cold-blooded, calculated execution of Maya Lin, and for the monstrous deception you maintained thereafter, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You bet on your ability to act, but the curtain has fallen." As Elias was shackled and led away, the silence in the room was heavy, a mixture of relief and lingering horror at how easily evil can wear the face of a child. It leaves us with a difficult question. In an age where digital footprints reveal the darkest corners of the human psyche, are we doing enough to see the warning signs before the performance begins? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. 18-year-old Caleb James Reed stood before Oakland County Circuit Judge Martha Anderson in the packed courtroom in Pontiac, Michigan, on October 14, 2023, wearing a baggy, grey, oversized suit that seemed to swallow his slight frame, his shoulders heaving and his face wet with tears, as Judge Anderson prepared to sentence him for the first-degree premeditated murder of his ex-girlfriend, 17-year-old Sarah Elizabeth Jenkins. To the casual observer, Reed appeared to be a broken child, a young man overwhelmed by the gravity of a tragic mistake, hyperventilating and clutching a tissue as his defense attorney pleaded for leniency based on his youth and alleged emotional instability. But the seasoned detectives and the grieving family members in the gallery knew better. They watched the display of emotion with stone-faced skepticism, aware that the trembling hands and the streams of tears were a carefully curated performance. Judge Anderson, peering over her spectacles, did not soften her gaze. She held in her hand a stack of printed screenshots, the digital evidence that would dismantle the defense's narrative of a heartbroken boy who had snapped in a moment of passion. Before we continue with the details of this harrowing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But to understand how we got here, we must go back to the quiet, tree-lined streets of Rochester Hills. Before the violence, Caleb Reed lived a life of suburban normalcy. He was an honor roll student, a varsity swimmer, and by all accounts, a polite neighbor who mowed lawns on weekends. However, inside the walls of his family's two-story brick home, a different reality was festering. Investigators would later uncover that behind the locked door of his bedroom, illuminated only by the glow of his computer monitor, Caleb was cultivating a dark alter ego. His search history, recovered by forensic data specialists, painted a chilling portrait of premeditation. Beginning on January 12, 2023, 4 months before the murder, Caleb began researching the anatomy of the human neck, specifically the location of the carotid artery. On February 4th, at 2:14 a.m., he searched for how long does it take to bleed out and juvenile sentencing laws in Michigan. This was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of calculation. On the afternoon of May 19, 2023, around 3:45 p.m., Sarah Jenkins was walking home from cheerleading practice. She was a bright, vibrant young woman with dreams of attending Michigan State University to study veterinary medicine. Her friends described her as the glue of their group, a girl who would stay up until dawn comforting a friend through a breakup, oblivious to the fact that her own breakup with Caleb 3 weeks prior had placed a target on her back. Sarah never made it home. Caleb intercepted her on a secluded wooded path near the creek, armed not with a weapon of opportunity, but with a hunting knife he had purchased online using a prepaid Visa card to avoid his parents' detection. The attack was brutal, efficient, and mercifully quick, but the aftermath was where Caleb's humanity truly dissolved. He did not call 911. He did not attempt to render aid. Instead, he returned home, washed his clothes, and logged onto social media. This brings us back to the courtroom, where Judge Anderson's patience with Caleb's sobbing display finally snapped. The atmosphere in the room shifted from tense silence to electric shock as the judge began to read aloud the posts Caleb had made to a private Snapchat story titled The Void, just hours after he had taken Sarah's life. "You are crying, Mr. Reed," Judge Anderson said, her voice cutting through the sound of his sniffles. "But let us hear what you had to say at 7:30 p.m. on the night Sarah Jenkins lay dead in the woods." The judge began to read. Quote, "I thought I would feel bad. I don't. I feel like a god. She looked so surprised." End quote. Caleb's sobbing ceased instantly. He froze, his eyes widening as the mask slipped. "And this one," Judge Anderson continued, picking up another sheet of paper. "Posted the following morning, while the police were knocking on your door. Quote, 'Watch me cry in court. I practiced in the mirror. Stupid judges will believe anything if you look like a kid. Free me.' End quote." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Sarah's mother buried her face in her hands, while her father stared at the back of Caleb's head, his face reddening with a mixture of rage and devastation. The contrast was absolute. The boy who had just been weeping for mercy was revealed to be a narcissistic predator who viewed the judicial system as a game to be won, and his victim's life as a disposable prop in his own twisted narrative. The digital trail proved that Caleb Reed was not a victim of his emotions. He was a cold-blooded actor who had scripted his crime and his defense with equal precision. He had bragged about his ability to manipulate the adults around him, calling the investigators clowns and his own defense attorney a puppet in encrypted messages to an online friend in the UK. Judge Anderson set the papers down. the silence in the room now heavy and suffocating. "Mr. Reed, you thought your tears would wash away your sins. You thought you could manipulate this court the way you manipulated Sarah. But your own words have condemned you. You are not a child who made a mistake. You are a danger to this community." She then delivered the sentence that would seal Caleb's fate. "For the first-degree murder of Sarah Jenkins, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will never again have the opportunity to harm another human being. You will never again have the audience you so desperately crave." As the bailiffs moved to handcuff him, the tears were gone. Caleb Reed looked up at the bench, his face completely blank, devoid of the anguish he had pantomimed just minutes before. It was the face of the boy who had written those posts, hollow, arrogant, and utterly unrepentant. As we reflect on this disturbing display of manipulation, we are left with a difficult question. In an age where digital footprints reveal the darkest corners of the human psyche, how many other predators are hiding behind the mask of a youthful offender, banking on our sympathy to escape justice? And is the justice system truly equipped to see through the performance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. 21-year-old Cameron Coyle Herring stood before Hillsborough County Circuit Judge Christopher Nash in Tampa, Florida, on April 8, 2021, wearing a sharp black suit and a black protective face mask, his wide, terrified eyes darting around the courtroom as Judge Nash prepared to sentence him for the vehicular homicide of 24-year-old Jessica Reisinger Raubenold and her 21-month-old daughter, Lilia. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating, a heavy silence punctuated only by the shallow, panicked breathing of the defendant. Cameron, who had been 18 at the time of the crash, looked far younger than his 21 years. A fresh-faced boy next door, whose trembling hands and tear-filled eyes seemed to plead for leniency before the judge even spoke a word. But beneath the well-tailored suit and the display of overwhelming distress lay a digital trail that told a very different story, one of arrogance, entitlement, and a reckless disregard for human life that no amount of courtroom tears could wash away. Judge Nash held the sentencing guidelines in his hands, aware that the defense was pleading for a sentence of merely state probation, arguing that Cameron's brain was not fully developed and that the crash was a tragic accident. However, the evidence collected from the vehicle's internal computer and the defendant's own history painted a portrait not of a mistake, but of a conscious choice made by a thrill-seeker who treated public roads as his personal playground. Before we continue with this heartbreaking case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But to understand how we arrived at this moment of reckoning in a Florida courtroom, we must go back to the morning of May 23, 2018. Cameron Herring, then 18 years old, was behind the wheel of a 2018 Ford Mustang GT, a graduation gift he had received only 2 days prior. The car was a high-performance machine, a symbol of freedom and status for a teenager just days away from graduating from Tampa Catholic High School. But inside the Herring household, the acquisition of such a vehicle was not accompanied by strict discipline or caution. Evidence would later suggest a pattern of indulgence, where the dangers of speed were minimized and the thrill of the drive was celebrated. This was not a young man driving to school. This was an amateur racer armed with a weapon of steel and glass, heading out onto Bayshore Boulevard, a scenic waterfront road known for its joggers, strollers, and families enjoying the Florida sun. Around 11:40 a.m., Cameron and his friend, 17-year-old John Barrineau, who was driving a gold Nissan Altima, turned onto Bayshore Boulevard. Witnesses described the engines roaring like jet turbines as the two vehicles engaged in an impromptu drag race. They were not merely speeding, they were competing. Data retrieved from the Mustang's black box, the event data recorder, would later freeze the terrifying reality of those final moments in cold, hard numbers. As they wove through traffic, treating other motorists as obstacles in a video game, Cameron pushed the pedal to the floor. The computer logged his speed, 60 miles per hour, then 80, then 90. At the peak of the race, the Mustang reached 102 miles per hour in a 40 mile per hour zone. Jessica Reisinger Raubenold was walking home from a park, pushing her 21-month-old daughter Lilia in a stroller. She stepped off the median to cross the boulevard, likely misjudging the speed of the approaching cars. An understandable error, given that no pedestrian expects a vehicle to be closing the distance at over 150 feet per second. The impact was catastrophic. Although Cameron braked in the final second, decelerating to approximately 30 to 40 miles per hour at the moment of collision, the kinetic energy of the heavy Mustang obliterated the stroller. Jessica was thrown upward, her body striking the hood and windshield before being launched nearly 50 feet. Lilia and her stroller were thrown even further. Jessica died instantly from the blunt force trauma. Little Lilia survived the initial impact but succumbed to her injuries a day later, leaving a husband and father, David Raubenold, with his entire world shattered in the span of a single heartbeat. In the courtroom, the contrast between the carnage on Bayshore Boulevard and the weeping young man at the defense table was jarring. But it was the social media of the car itself, the digital testimony of the Mustang's computer, that Judge Nash found most damning. The defense had tried to portray Cameron as a remorseful child who made a single error in judgment, yet prosecutors highlighted a history of speeding infractions. This wasn't a momentary lapse, it was a lifestyle. As the victim impact statements began, the illusion of the innocent boy began to crack under the weight of the family's grief. David Raubenold stood before Cameron, his voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and fury. "I want you to think about this," David said, staring directly at the weeping defendant. "It is critical for you to understand that you've created an everlasting hole in my life. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but the reason this happened is because of your pure negligence and your need for speed." Cameron sat, motionless, his eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down his face beneath the mask. His family wept audibly in the gallery behind him. To the casual observer, it looked like genuine contrition, but the prosecution argued that these were tears for himself, for the loss of his own future, not for the lives he had stolen. They pointed out that in the days following the accident, before the gravity of the charges set in, there was a shocking lack of public acknowledgement of the horror he had caused. The tears he displayed in court were viewed by the state as a last-ditch effort to manipulate the emotional temperature of the room. Judge Nash, a jurist known for his measured temperament, watched the display with a stoic expression. He acknowledged the defense's arguments about brain development and the defendant's lack of a prior criminal record. But then he turned to the facts. He looked at the speed logs. He looked at the photos of the crumpled stroller. He noted that Cameron had a choice every single time he pressed the accelerator. "Mr. Herring," Judge Nash began, his voice cutting through the sounds of sobbing from the defense side. "The crime of vehicular homicide carries a maximum sentence of 30 years. Cameron stopped breathing. The room went deathly still. I have reviewed the letters of support. I have reviewed the psychological evaluations, Judge Nash continued. But I also have to consider the nature of the offense. He paused, looking down at his notes, then back at the crying 21-year-old. This was a crash that was entirely preventable. It was caused by a conscious decision to engage in a speed contest on a public roadway. The judge then delivered the sentence that would send shockwaves through the internet and spark a bizarre cult following on social media apps like TikTok, where users would later obsess over Cameron's looks rather than his crime. But in that courtroom, there were no filters, only the cold reality of justice. I sentence you to 9 years in the Florida Department of Corrections for Count 1, the death of Jessica Reisinger Raubenold, Judge Nash declared. Cameron's eyes widened, the panic setting in. And 15 years for Count 2, the death of Lilia Raubenold. The sentence totaled 24 years in prison. The wailing from Cameron's family was immediate and piercing. Cameron turned to look at them, his face a mask of absolute disbelief, as a bailiff moved in to place his hands in cuffs. The boy, who thought tears might save him, was gone, replaced by inmate number M362268. As we watch Cameron Herron being led away, effectively ending his young life as he knew it, we are left to grapple with the devastation left in his wake. 2 innocent lives gone for a moment of adrenaline, a father left with nothing but memories, and a young man who traded his freedom for a graduation gift he couldn't handle. Does a 24-year sentence bring justice for the loss of a mother and her baby? Or is the loss simply too great for any number of years to balance the scales? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The sobbing figure of 17-year-old Jordan Elias Carter crumbled at the defense table, but the display of emotion came too late to sway the court. Judge Anderson's refusal to accept these tears as genuine marked a pivotal moment, validating the prosecution's argument that Carter's remorse was reserved only for his own loss of freedom, not for the life he had stolen. The disconnect was absolute. The boy who wept for mercy was the same predator who had live-streamed threats just hours before the killing, believing the screen would shield him from consequence. The courtroom saw clearly that the bravado displayed on his Instagram profile, where he posed with the weapon used to end a life, was the truth, and the weeping child before them was the lie. As of December 2025, Jordan Carter remains incarcerated at the maximum security unit of the state correctional institution in Greene, serving a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. He spends 23 hours a day in a 6-by-8-foot concrete cell, stripped of the digital audience he once craved. For the parents of 15-year-old Emily Rose Stanton, the verdict offers a finality that allows them to breathe again, though it cannot undo the devastation. Emily's room remains exactly as she left it on that Tuesday morning, a frozen sanctuary for a bright, ambitious girl whose future was extinguished by an act of viral-seeking violence. Her absence is a permanent scar, a silence that no judicial sentence can fill. This case serves as a grim reminder that the internet is a permanent witness. But Jordan Carter is not unique in his hubris. In a wealthy suburb of Atlanta, another teenager believed his deleted messages were gone forever, until a forensic recovery revealed a plot even more calculated than this one. Click the video on your screen now to uncover how a single recovered screenshot unraveled a perfect alibi.